managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management. Trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join our Discord channel to chat with our hosts, ask questions during the live stream, customize live stream alerts, and more. Visit securityweekly.com/Discord to receive an invite. All right, for our next interview, Jim Routh. Jim Routh joins us today. Sorry, just learning to say people's names. Sometimes my brain doesn't work with me. Jim Routh joins us today to talk about detecting breaches in applications and why every security team needs data science expertise. Fascinating topic that I'm looking forward to getting into. Jim is currently on many boards, but today is representing Reveal Security, a company focused on detecting attackers and malicious insiders in business applications. Jim is also a boardroom survivor, bearing the CISO mantle for over 20 years of his career. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate it. Great to be here.
Yeah, and just maybe we can start there and talk a little bit about what it's like living that CISO role. I know a lot of your time in the CISO role was very early days, and maybe the CISO role is very different today, but yeah, you've had some very long tenures in terms of how long folks typically stay in a CISO role, and some very short ones. So I'm kind of interested in what makes a good pairing, I guess, in a CISO role. On the Business Security Weekly podcast, Jason Albuquerque is always talking about his 5 C's. The 5 things he looks for that, if it doesn't mesh, then the CISO role isn't going to work out for him. And their culture, communication, which is access to the C-suite or whatever access you need, coffers, which is a bit of a reach, I think, for that one, but it refers to budget, compensation, and then compliance, whether or not it's just a check mark to them or they actually take some of this stuff seriously. So curious about your thoughts there.
Yeah, so there's a lot that we can talk about. So the first is, in my experience, about 70% of the people that interview CISOs have no idea how to interview a CISO or what they're looking for in a CISO. That puts a particular burden and pressure on the CISO candidate. And what the CISO needs to do is to understand, going into an opportunity, how much transformational leadership is required or requested. And that may be 2 different things, which in of itself is a bit of an indicator. So, for example, there could be a organization that says, hey, we got a really good, mature security function. We have good talent in the security department. And look, we're just trying to get through the next few years managing tight budgets. So we want efficiency and effectiveness in just status quo. And that's one level, probably the minimal level of transformational leadership. And then there's, we got some really significant problems in our cybersecurity function. We'd like you to rebuild the function and acquire and develop talent at a higher level than what we've done in the past. We need to change how the cybersecurity team interacts with the rest of the enterprise. There's been a lot of problems and challenges, turnover, et cetera. So that's like a heavy transformational mandate, but it's within the realm of the cybersecurity function or organization. And then there's the end of the spectrum is, we'd like to achieve cyber resilience across the enterprise. Not entirely sure what that means, but it means different behaviors for every employee in our enterprise. And so that's a fundamental transformational shift. And we want you to play a role in that in terms of the leadership responsibility. So the CISO has to kind of figure out what the expectations are and then what the requirements are. And hopefully there's some alignment there And if there is, the likelihood for longer tenure goes up because the expectations are a little bit better understood and managed along the way. So, right off the bat, figuring out what kind of transformational appetite the requirements are, and then what's being asked for is one of the factors in longevity. The other is that, and this is different today, getting to one of your questions versus what it was when I started as a CISO was 20 years ago, and my first two CISO gigs, one was at American Express, and the second was at Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. And in both cases, I made a fundamental error that many first-time CISOs make. And what I did is I met the expectations of my stakeholders. And my stakeholders were the CEO and the CEO direct reports, essentially the executive leadership team in both cases. And when I say I made a fundamental mistake, it's because my assumption was I had to meet those expectations. What I really should have been doing, but nobody sat me down and told me this beforehand, so I had to learn it the hard way. What I should have been doing was managing those expectations, not meeting them. And I'll be specific. I naturally fell into the role of a subject matter expert. Why? Well, I knew more about cybersecurity than my stakeholders. And that's
you became irreplaceable? Is that what you're saying?
No, I think what happened is that the leaders delegated the decision to the subject matter expert, but they really weren't totally bought into the outcome of the decision-making process. They're kind of like, yeah, well, what does the newbie say? And, okay, well, we'll give that a whirl and see how that works out for a while. And so what happened is budget pressure or market pressure or business pressure kind of eroded the decisions that I thought were kind of cast in stone, because largely they were delegated to the subject matter expert and they weren't really consensus. And that is really gets back to what today I think is a premium skill that adds to longevity for a CISO in a cybersecurity role. And that is being able to facilitate consensus of the senior business leaders. And that's a skill that requires the CISO not to be a subject matter expert, because to facilitate consensus effectively, you have to be unbiased. You can't be opinionated on a particular outcome of a decision. You have to facilitate the team coming to consensus and using other subject matter experts, perhaps, but playing the role of demonstrating neutrality. And that's a skill set that the CISOs are not ingrained with in coming up the ranks. And so first-time CISOs are very often stuck in a mode of being the subject matter expert. And unfortunately, it's a painful lesson, but that's not effective to drive long-term tenure. And once I kind of mastered that, I had a lot more success and was able to stay in my position for until I wanted to change versus anyone else.
That's fascinating. And I often wonder, like when I see, someone take a CISO role and not have a background in security, I wonder if that benefits them. Like I've seen HR professionals laterally move into a CISO role with having no security background. I've seen general counsel make that lateral move into the CISO role. And I've often thought, especially for financial firms, maybe somebody with 20 years in loss prevention might make a good CISO, because they already have that, good handle on how they think about risk. But yeah, what you just shared is not something I'd really considered. But I think it's definitely, I think shifts that kind of thought of the CISO career path, where I think a lot of people kind of think of it as like an eventual goal, like to move through all this technical stuff and then you graduate to CISO, but I think a lot of people that get to that point that have that path through security tend to be very unsatisfied in the CISO role and find themselves very frustrated.
It turns out that stakeholder expectation management is a learned and practiced skill that you have to practice to learn. And well, that means you got to experience it. You got to try out different techniques. You have to adjust. You have to adapt. And you really don't get to exercise that skill set unless you're either a BISO or a CISO. So you can study techniques. You can certainly retool yourself in terms of being more knowledgeable, but what works for you in the context of consensus building and facilitation, that's something you have to practice, make mistakes at, adjust, and learn how to apply. And so I'd say that skill today is really a premium for successful CISOs. I don't think you get it just by coming up the ranks as a leader. I think there are some nuances for dealing both with executive leaders and board members. You got to practice that to learn and apply and master the skills.
And just for folks, when Jim says BISOs, and my knowledge isn't extensive here, but my understanding is a BISO is when you have an organization so large that individual parts of the business need their own kind of product line CISOs. Like it's just too much for one central CISO to handle all that stuff and to dive into the necessary details there. Is that about right?
It is about right. There are cases where it's not so much size that dictates it, but sometimes a business, for instance, a subsidiary might be in a totally different business
market,
with a different market, different attack surface. And so there can be a lot of unique attributes or characteristics to a part of the business that warrant someone that's focused on the business objectives for that business and the priorities in terms of cybersecurity, which may be fundamentally different than the larger enterprise. So there are some other reasons for having BISOs, not just size and scope, but size and scope is certainly one of them.
Yeah. So one more question before we kind of shift to analytics and data science and the makeup of security teams and what they focus on. Do you have any CISO survival tips, like staying in the job a long time, or maybe recommendations on books to read or anything to put someone in the frame of mind that you're describing here? Anything that really kind of made it click for you? That somebody can maybe pick up and read.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question in terms of tenure. I typically talk to CISOs about survival, and survival is like survival like till tomorrow or till maybe next week, and that's as far as we look forward. But your question is really like looking out a little bit longer term. What are some of the things to think about? One thing comes to mind right off the bat, and that is, and I've seen this time and time again, you have a leader who you're reporting to, who essentially, is your sponsor, if you will, within the company. And it's a good idea to cultivate sponsorship that's outside of the chain of command with your leader. So ideally a peer of your leader, or just someone that's in a different function, not tied to cybersecurity. And what you want to do is cultivate that sponsorship relationship. Now, what does a sponsor do? Well, the primary thing that a sponsor does is a sponsor has your back when you're not in the room. So when there are critical meetings and decisions being made and you're not part of that process, which is common, then you want someone in the room that's at least looking out for your interests and has your back and will defend you or support you as needed. And if you have more than one of those sponsorship relationships, you're likely for a longer tenure simply because if you report to the CIO and the CIO leaves after 18 months, you got a new CIO, and that person stays for 2 years, and then you have another CIO. All of the change of leadership that's normal in any kind of organization that that's dealing with growth, it leaves you vulnerable. And you're in transition for new leaders, and sometimes your job is to help your new leader get acclimated, oriented to their job, and that's the primary focus. Having relationships with multiple sponsors can insulate you a bit and at least provide a level of support during transition that will add to your longevity as a CISO. So it's not something that's widely discussed, but cultivating sponsorship outside of your chain of command can really help you weather the storm and frankly be part of the positive transformational change underway when leaders change roles.
So it sounds like the politics are unavoidable. Basically what I'm hearing is watch House of Cards on Netflix and take notes.
When there's people, they're politics. And the more people, the more intense the politics. And that's true of any organization in any industry in any form, shape, or fashion.
But yeah, good advice. You can't throw everybody, in that room when you're having those conversations under the bus and hope to keep that roll along. But totally makes sense. I'm glad you shared that. But yeah, let's kind of shift over to the headline topic here, which is analytics and data science. So first off, you're on the board of a lot of companies, but today we're kind of particularly talking about some of the stuff that you're doing with Reveal Security. And I understand what Reveal does is they're kind of focused on insider threat. Is that correct?
It is correct. That's one of the things they're really focused on, using application log data to identify anomalistic behavior, and to do that in an implementation model that's not reliant upon high skill and high technology or lots of intensive technology. So to make it easier for enterprises to use this. I'm going to give you a bit of some context for that that I think will be helpful. I have a strong belief in this. I've been doing it for 10 years, doing it. What I mean is applying data science to cybersecurity. And I believe that data science is foundational to cybersecurity, any cybersecurity program of size and scale going forward, which is not a widely held belief, but it is one that has stood the test of time for me. So the first person I hired back when I was at Aetna as CISO was a chief data scientist dedicated to cybersecurity. First person I hired at MassMutual was chief data scientist dedicated to cybersecurity. And so building a data science capability and team within my organization, or as part of my organization, or partnered with the data science team in the enterprise, doesn't really matter. What matters is you have a focused set of data science practitioners that are interested in learning the cybersecurity domain and making contributions. And the basis for that really started from what we've learned in the last dozen or so years from the FBI doing criminal interrogations. And so what they learned, and they've applied successfully going forward, is you can actually tell when people are lying in an interview by reading micro expressions, they're called, that are, right? You've heard this. A lot of people have heard this. Right?
What's his name that put together that book? It's called What Everybody Is Saying. Everybody.
Yes. I don't remember his name, but I know exactly what you're referring to.
He has a bunch of like gambling books, like Looking for Tells and stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah. It can be used. That's your point. It can be used in a number of circumstances. But here's the principle. The principle is that body language doesn't lie. That's the principle, right? And
Yeah.
and we see that
Because it's
intuitively.
unconscious. Yeah.
It's unconscious behavior. It's exactly right. And so we see that in communication. And it turns out when you're online, when anyone is online, that your online actions and behaviors are telling. And they're telling in this regard. They either are part of an established pattern or not. And the beauty is that we can measure behavior that's part of an established pattern, or if it's not, we can measure how far it deviates from that pattern. We can represent that mathematically. We learn this in statistics or in geometry. You learn that any data elements can be presented on a graph, XY axis, and represented numerically. So if we can turn it into numbers, it turns out computers can do a lot with numbers. And so if we can cluster events in a range that represents a pattern, and then we can look at real-time events, compare it to the pattern, and find deviation. And when we find that deviation, we measure that deviation, so we can establish a threshold that triggers automation or automated workflow when that threshold is reached. So when the behavioral deviation reaches a high enough level, we can trigger an action. Now, everything I've just described, we can do in milliseconds with the compute technology that we have available. So it eliminates the need for data around a security event to be presented to a SOC analyst, as an example. The SOC analyst has to collect other data to put context around that event, and then decide on the outcome. Do I treat it this way or that way, or what's the action that's necessary to take? And then they have to execute and take that action, and that takes time and effort. That's just the nature of a cybersecurity professional, right? So, but if we can measure deviation of behavior and then trigger automated response, we can do all of that in milliseconds. And essentially, now what we have is a way of designing frontline security controls that operate in real time at scale and never impact negatively the humans involved in cybersecurity. In fact, the humans can step back, look at the transactions, and do analysis and cyber hunting that they never had the capability to do before, because it's a frontline control. So in cybersecurity, specifically in identity access management, there are many hundreds of use cases that can operate with this very simple pattern, this very simple idea and construct. Now, it's a little bit more difficult to build models that allow you to use streaming data to trigger the automated actions and build out the infrastructure to do that. And you need some technical engineering skill. You need some data science skill, machine learning, algorithm development skill. So there's skills that you need. The point is that we can buy software today that does that for us and is relatively easy and straightforward to implement. Reveal is a great example of that. And there are other choices that we have as well. And those choices are increasing in terms of those that have products and capabilities using ML today in real time. If we have an EDR solution today across our enterprise, and if you're using any of the top 4 EDR vendors, they're all using machine learning algorithms that that are behavioral based, essentially, to try to identify threats to the enterprise. And so more and more product capability. Go ahead.
There's 2 things there I want to speak to before we dive any further into this. The first is I love, first of all, the idea of bringing data science into security. Totally makes sense. Security has tons of data, and most of the folks in security don't have a background in data science. They don't necessarily understand what's possible with that data. What kind of insights you can pull out of it, what you can do with that data, how you can pull out important insights and like you said, find some opportunities to automate things, that just wouldn't occur to the normal person. Like I remember once working with somebody, like I heard this rhythmic sound coming from somebody else's cubicle. And it was somebody that was just trying to clean up data in a spreadsheet, but across like thousands of rows. And they were just like doing the same operation thousands of times. I was like, hey, stop. Let me show you how macros work. right? Like, you can create a macro to do that, and it'll do it. It'll take you like 60 seconds to write, to record the macro, and then, a fraction of a second for your computer to do all that for you instead of you getting RSI doing this manually. But yeah, I just want to call this out because this is something Andy Ellis talks about a lot, who also a 20-year CISO, where he came to the realization, look, if I want to build a report, why would I take somebody who's an expert at writing exploits and using Metasploit and stuff and throw them into a writing gig? No, I'm going to hire a journalist to do that. So he hired a journalist to do that. I need to train employees on security awareness and stuff like that. Why would I take somebody with a security background to do that? I'm going to hire a teacher and have a teacher take that role. So I think, this is like, not that the talent problem is imagined. Like obviously we do have some skill sets that don't exist in the quantity that we need, but then we've got other skill sets where there are people out there looking for jobs that would love to take these roles and are much better picks for it than somebody with a security background. So I love the idea of bringing somebody with data science experience in. But then the second thing I wanted to touch on is the importance for both sides to work together. There needs to be a relationship between somebody with security background and somebody with that data science background, because I've worked with a lot of data science scientists who don't have that security background, so they can't judge when the data that they're looking at is trash, is bad data. It's not good quality data, or they can't rely on certain things in the data. Like say you're taking data with that's going to be false positive heavy, data from an IDS, for example. They need to understand that a large quantity of that data is not going to be terribly useful before they start building models around it.
Absolutely right. So the one ingredient that's necessary for this to work is to make sure that your cybersecurity professionals have an appetite and a hunger for learning. The second is to make sure your data scientists have a hunger for learning. If you could do those two things, that makes it work, because data scientists actually like extending other domain expertise. They like growing domains that they're proficient in. And they recognize that there's a learning curve associated to do that, but they have incentive to do that to build their portfolio. Cybersecurity professionals really should have a high appetite to learn, because threat actors change their tactics all the time. You have to adjust. So to be successful long-term in cybersecurity, you have to be really interested in retooling, because it's a requirement.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a good book. It's called Algorithms to Live By, and have
we
both
love a good book here.
Have both data scientists and cybersecurity people read the book. If they love the book, they have the propensity to be a data scientist. If they like the book, they have the propensity to use data science fundamentals in what they do. If they hate the book, then if they're a cybersecurity professional, they have to be friends with data scientists. So just by reading the book, you can kind of figure out in those three outcomes.
All right, we got two books that are required reading coming out of this podcast so far. Sean, did you have any questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jim, you have a lot of experience as a CSO, CISO, working in companies across industries, including companies with large environments. I'm really curious to hear some of the challenges that you had to deal with, given those environments and the size of those environments, as far as ones that were solvable, that took some time, maybe some collaboration among teams. And what are some of the big challenges that still need good solutions that you see that are out there?
Yeah, actually, Sean, that's a great question, because I'll give you one example. When I was at JP Morgan Chase, I was responsible for software security globally. And so I did a count of where all of the developers and where they were around the globe. And there were 19,500 developers. And so I had to figure out how to teach them how to use static analysis and dynamic scanning and adjust the SDLC regardless of what technology platform they were working on. And I had to, do a little bit of missionary work in trying to get them to be somewhat receptive to cybersecurity. This is, probably a decade or longer ago. So, today, fortunately, developers are a lot more receptive to applying security practices, really just to create more resilient code. And they're much more knowledgeable about cybersecurity implications today than back then. But the point I'm making is that when you're a CISO or when you're a senior, leader in cybersecurity, the choice of the techniques not only have to be applicable to the desired outcome that you're looking for, but they have to be scalable across a big enterprise. And so the more complex the message, the more difficult it is to implement. The simpler the message, the easier it is to implement. And easy is probably not a word that belongs in a large scale enterprise. So when you're dealing with an enterprise of 300,000 employees, the techniques that you choose and how you implement those techniques is more important than whether you're focused on the right risks. It turns out that some practices that are scalable in a 100-person organization or enterprise, don't work at all in a 10,000-person enterprise. And so you actually have to change and adjust the selection of techniques and how they're implemented based on the size and scale of the enterprise, or you're not going to have any impact in influencing the outcome. And the only difference in a large organization is when there's a security breach, the business impact is large as well, because it's a large enterprise with a lot of customers or a lot of customer data or what have you. So scaling the choice of techniques that you use, it's not as simple as knowing what the problem is, knowing what the solution set is, and then just going and implementing it. The actual implementation is far more intricate and far more challenging in a large scale enterprise. And frankly, it takes a little bit longer to implement as well.
Do you have any examples of something like that might work at a 100-person startup, but not work in a large enterprise?
Yeah, so it's funny you say that, because let's just say a 100-person enterprise, and let's say you got 15 IT people that are trying to stand up some cloud services and some local infrastructure. If you look at asset inventory, IT asset inventory, if they're using a spreadsheet to track their asset inventory and they're identifying the configuration standard, if that's even a term that's used, but the configuration of each of the devices, and they're tracking on a spreadsheet, that actually works pretty well. And the irony is that when you get to 1,000-person enterprise or a 10,000 person enterprises, supported with devices and infrastructure, that doesn't work so well. That spreadsheet, even with macros, Adrian, the spreadsheet doesn't work quite as well in terms of maintaining an asset inventory and having some sort of standardization. And so you have to throw technology, really automation, at that problem to do that well. And of course, IT hygiene is a foundation for cybersecurity in any size organization. So you have to use some automation capability that lends itself to scalability for larger size enterprises. And in some cases, smaller size enterprises doing things kind of seat of the pants are okay. It's why startups go through that phase. And there's always a reckoning at some point where they have to put more automation into the normal execution process of running their business, because it's just not standardized enough. There's too many variabilities. And that causes both security vulnerabilities, but it also causes, IT outages that eventually you want to grow out of.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I know you've got a hard stop at 4:30, so we I think Sean has one more question, and then we'll let you go and make sure we don't keep you too long.
Absolutely, thanks, Adrian.
Appreciate that.
So there's a lot of talk about scale. Certainly, you've mentioned scale several times, and the importance of scale for business to work, right? And we've seen some things that help with scale. We've seen cloud, and we've seen the benefits of cloud, some challenges with cloud, but we've also seen blockchain being thrown around as a potential solution to solve problems. And now we're kind of on the cusp of what AI could potentially do for us. What do you see as where blockchain and AI may be helpful or not as we move forward over the next 5 to 10 years plus?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's kind of forces us kind of look forward a bit. So blockchain is, I don't put it in the same category league as AI, because and AI, you mentioned we're at the cusp of kind of leveraging that. We're well beyond the cusp. So, I worked at enterprises, I don't know, 8 years ago, that they might have had close to 1,000 machine learning algorithms running in production at the time. I know when I was at Aetna, we had somewhere around 300 machine learning algorithms driving frontline cybersecurity controls. And we were just a very small part of the overall enterprise data science capability that was deployed in production. So many, many data intensive enterprises, financial services, healthcare entities today have machine learning algorithms driving production data as a norm. And so we're just going to see more and more of this for all the obvious reasons of productivity and effectiveness going forward. What we're also going to see is what we've seen kind of with Microsoft introducing AI into their search engine. We're going to see lots of cases where it doesn't work, and lots of cases where the models are either biased or wrong. And so we, as enterprises, have to get more disciplined in how we create machine learning algorithms to ensure that they're not biased and to ensure that they're doing the right thing. And that's a people function. That will never be a technology function or automation. That's a people function. Have to do that. We have to use judgment in how we do that. We have to make sure that the machine learning algorithms that we create to put in production are actually secure or can't be changed with bad test data. So there's a resiliency factor that goes into the models that's security related, and we have to improve the tools that we have available to do that, to test the efficacy of the models from a security standpoint as well as from a bias perspective. So I see that growing exponentially. Blockchain has a place, but I don't think it's as transformative as what we've read about and learned about for the last 5 or 6 years. I think that AI is clearly a fundamental shift, and I think cloud is a fundamental IT transformational shift that is predominant across enterprises. I think blockchain has places where it fits, but I don't see it as revolutionary in terms of changing technology to the scale that both AI is and cloud computing is.
Yeah, I think we're in full agreement on that, Jim. We've it's come up a lot, especially when we do a news segment. But Andreessen Horowitz keeps pumping money into it, so maybe we're wrong. I don't know.
We'll see. Time will tell.
Indeed. Jim, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. It was a great conversation. Hit a lot of topics. I think all great. Yeah.
Sean, Adrian, thank you. I appreciate it, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.